The Eighth Amendment states, quote, "Excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted," end quote. All court systems of the United States abide by this, yet some children are still subject to the cruel and unusual punishment of life in prison without parole. There is no justification of this sentence worthy enough for the mother who has seen scars on her child of words carved into his skin by adult inmates. America must put an end to the cruelty of sentencing children to death in prison. The United States has made grand advancements thus far in regarding death in prison for juveniles. However, there is still further to go. As the only country in the world that still hands this punishment to children, it is time for reform. A life sentence with no chance of parole for a crime committed as a child is unconstitutional. The Supreme Court's explanation on why it is unconstitutional for a juvenile to be sentenced to death is, quote, "The death penalty is a disproportionate punishment for the young. Immaturity diminishes their culpability, as does their susceptibility to outside pressures and influences," end quote. This statement seems hypocritical. For the court to ban capital punishment for children on these grounds, but to then turn around and allow death in prison, is very confusing. Both punishments are terminal. They are irreversible condemnations of a child, declaring them to forever be unworthy of freedom. The only difference is that death in prison sentence allows the child to rot first, as opposed to immediate death. Many people even believe that life without parole is the worst of the two. Just ask the families of children who were sentenced to die in prison, but then lost their baby to suicide. According to the Equal Justice Initiative, a juvenile's chances of committing suicide are multiplied by 36 when they become incarcerated in an adult prison. Both sentences include and end with death. Both sentences are unconstitutional. Children need protection. They are already not allowed to smoke, drink, vote, drive without restrictions, give blood, buy guns, and a range of other behaviors. Society outlines these boundaries for youth to make them consciously aware that they are not yet adults with complete freedom. Despite these many life restrictions, it is still legal to sentence children to life in adult prison. A single day in adult jail is too much, but a lifetime is just unimaginable. Within the confinements of prison, kids will surely be victimized. Zusha Ellenson, a journalist for the Wall Street Journal, reports that almost 10% of children in state juvenile facilities are victims of sexual assault. As unnerving as this statistic is, it is as bright as sunshine compared to adult prisons. The Equal Justice Initiative states, quote, "Children are 5 times more likely to be sexually assaulted in adult prisons than in juvenile facilities," end quote. This places the number of child victims of sexual abuse in adult prisons at nearly half of all incarcerated children. Every person out there is a child in his or her life. Certainly, it is horrific to imagine them enduring violent and physical and sexual abuse. Even one instance can be detrimental when considering the lasting effects: unwanted pregnancies, sexually transmitted infections, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder, just to name a few. It is certainly cruel and unusual to declare that a child is only good enough for this brand of life. The opposition believes that adolescents should know better, and therefore deserve to be tried as adults for certain crimes. Justice Kennedy said that a death in prison sentence must be reserved for, quote, "the rarest of juvenile offenders, those whose crimes reflect permanent irreversibility," end quote. Yes, older children are more aware and know for the most part right from wrong. However, their justification for their crime can easily overpower the known consequences in the decision-making process. This is the true difference between children and adults. Justice Kagan attributes the, quote, "failure to appreciate risks and consequences," end quote, to adolescents. Adults speak all the time about how juveniles feel invincible. They look back upon their glory days in college, they reflect on the peak of their sports career, and they express fears of what their own children may do or have done. All these things have a common factor. People are willing to try or do almost anything during their adolescence without concern for the ramifications. Accountability is a new concept for teenagers, and they do not quite comprehend it fully. So even when it comes to violent crimes, the harshest punishment available is still not warranted. America must acknowledge the Constitution. America must admit wrongdoing. America must care for her children. This includes those who have made mistakes. America must put an end to the cruelty of sentencing children to death in prison.